Light has weight, a whisper of pressure that can steer a sun. Not with fire, not with noise, but with mirrors that learn to hover, with patience measured in centuries, with the soft arithmetic of photons meeting polish. Imagine a civilization that chooses time over speed, grace over spectacle, and writes a new intention into the motion of its star. Close your eyes for a moment and picture dawn. Low on the horizon, a faint frost of glints where none should be, a quiet necklace of statites, holding their places between gravity and light. Far upstream, engines breathe in the solar wind and return it as a gentle jet. No banners, no thunder, only a steady tone that gathers from a million small instruments and becomes direction. The planets keep their calm, the seasons do not wake, yet the whole ship of worlds begins to drift. Tonight we will walk slowly through this idea. We will touch the physics that lets light push, the geometry that holds a mirror in midair, the delicate imbalance that turns shine into thrust. We will meet the humble habits that keep a megastructure alive, the maps that read the galaxy as weather, and the quiet ethic that says, "Do not wake the garden while you move the sun." So let the room grow still. Let curiosity soften into wonder. As we set our course, I would love to chart our little midnight fleet, one lantern at a time. Tell me the hour you're drifting tonight, for it lets me draw a quiet map of when the world rests and guide future voyages to arrive as your night begins. And if these journeys bring you ease, a quiet like or a simple subscription will carry this small harbour of calm to others still awake. So, when you are ready, we begin a calm voyage through the grand design of cosmic megastructures. Tonight, the sky is a patient machine. Stars breathe their light into the dark, and the dark returns a gentle silence. Our sun seems unchanging to the human eye, a lantern that has never wavered. Yet across deep time every star moves, every neighbourhood shifts, supernovae bloom somewhere, subtle tides of gravity reshape orbits, and cold clouds drift like weather in a sky so large that a lifetime cannot feel it. A civilization that wants to last learns to think on softer scales. Not years, not centuries, but intervals long enough for mountains to rise and fall. On those scales, habitability is a shape that must be maintained. The home star warms the worlds, the magnetosphere shields them. The interstellar environment presses in with dust, wind, and cosmic rays. The galaxy itself is not static. It has arms like slow rivers, crowded ports of star birth, and quiet backwaters of calm. To move a star is not a gesture of conquest. It is a kind of gardening, patient and precise. The purpose is not speed but choice, a choice to stay a little farther from a future hazard, a choice to drift toward quieter space, where the background radiation softens and comet strikes become rarer, a choice to shepherd a chain of worlds together through eras when the galaxy rearranges its furniture, and the nearby sky will not always be friendly. The work is not a rush. The accelerations involved are kinder than a feather's fall. They are measured not in meters per second, but in millimeters per second, gained over thousands of years. Such small nudges do not shatter orbits. They do not tear at oceans or trade spring for winter. They do something gentler. They turn the entire solar system into a slow ship. And in the ship's quiet decks, life continues, season by season, with little sense that the hull is drifting. Imagine waking in a city that never sleeps and yet is never hurried. Above you, the sun rises as it always has. Satellites trace neat lines. The moon skims the edge of the morning. Somewhere, far beyond sight, a fleet of machines aligns the light and exhales it just so. They measure the pressure of sunlight, the whisper push of particles, and the gravity of the star itself. They add all these small voices together into a steady tone. The tone becomes thrust. The thrust becomes a long intention. The motive is safety, but there is more. Movement is a kind of knowledge. As the system drifts, sensors ride ahead. They taste the interstellar medium, chart densities, sniff for the perfumes of heavy elements, and listen for the distant thrum of young clusters. They map fog and clearings. They find lanes where cosmic rays are less harsh. In those lanes, the magnetospheres of planets age more slowly, DNA breaks less often, and clouds form while rain falls with fewer invisible disturbances. A civilization that tends a star learns an ethic of gentleness. Machines must last for thousands of years, and yet remain repairable by hands that have not been born. Energy must be spent with patience. Materials must circulate. The architecture cannot be brittle, because time will find every crack. Redundancy is not an afterthought. It is the design language. Everything that matters is done in many places at once. Everything that fails is caught softly by neighbours. The system behaves like a living tissue, renewing, clearing, growing, and sleeping. None of this forbids beauty. In fact, beauty is a guide. Structures that align with the physics of sunlight and gravity tend to curve and tessellate in simple ways. Mirrors find their stable faces. Collectors drift where pressure balances weight. Control systems learn to breathe with the sun's own cycles, quieting during storms, flexing as the wind changes, waking slowly after long winter shadows. The result is a necklace of machines that seems to float in thought, each bead a small mind that shares a larger pulse. From such a necklace, a civilization can learn to write in light. It can send soft beacons to its future selves and encode calendars that stretch across millennia, not to command, but to remind. Remember this orbit, this angle, this slow turn. Remember why we chose this lane. Remember the story of the cluster we avoided, the bright blue star that screamed into embers, the cometary shoals that we skirted by a width smaller than a thought. Our motive remains quiet. We are not running. We are consenting to become navigators of a deeper sea. The sun is not a prisoner of its birth cloud or its chance neighbours. With enough time and enough care, it can be steered, not like a ship that bucks against waves, but like a seed that grows toward light. The engine is not fire, it is light itself, focused and persuaded. The music is not noise, it is the sum of many small instruments, tuned and steady. Sleep comes easily when purpose is simple. Tonight, remember this, we do not need to hurry. The path is long, the forces are gentle, and the destination is not a point on a map, but a region of time where life can breathe without fear. The machines will wake before dawn. They will turn their faces, catch the first pressure of morning, and nudge the sun, just a little, along the line we drew for it, long ago, in the language of patience. Light looks harmless. It floods a room, warms a stone, fades a photograph, and seems to pass through the world without weight. Yet every ray carries momentum. Every photon brushes what it touches with a vanishingly small push. The pressure is so gentle that a human hand cannot feel it. Yet in the patient arithmetic of space, tiny forces add up. Give them time, and they can steer worlds. Physicists write this idea in a simple way. Energy divided by the speed of light becomes momentum. Sunlight is a river of energy, so it is also a river of momentum. When that river meets a surface, it shares a little of its push. A surface that absorbs light takes a small step. A surface that reflects light takes a slightly bigger one, because the photons bounce back and reverse direction. And with that reversal comes a greater trade in momentum. At the distance of Earth, the pressure of sunlight is only a few millionths of an atmosphere. Think of the lightest breath across your skin. Now divide it until nothing remains but the idea of a breath. That is what presses on a square metre of polished film suspended in space. It feels like nothing. It is enough to move a sail if the sail is broad, if the sail is bright, and if the sailor has patience. Sailing on light is not a metaphor. Spacecraft have already done it. No fuel burned, no propellant spilled, just a thin, reflective sheet unfurled into the sun. At first there is no drama, no surge, only a slow refusal to stay still. Day after day the path curves a little more than it would have. Months pass, and the tiny deviation becomes a different orbit. What begins as a whisper becomes a story that belongs to the sail and the star. Now imagine a sail that does not orbit but hovers. Gravity pulls it inward, sunlight pushes it away, and at a certain distance the two forces balance. Such a device is called a statite, a stationary satellite. It is a strange creature because it is not falling as most things do. It is held in place by light alone. The membrane must be large and thin, the control must be delicate, yet the physics is friendly. The sun supplies the push every moment. The sail drinks it and turns it into weightlessness. Statites teach an important lesson for stellar engines. If a sail can hold its place against gravity, then light can do more than nudge. It can support structures where no orbit would allow them, mirrors that wait in chosen positions, collectors that do not drift. From that steadiness comes control. A controlled mirror can shape the flow of sunlight with intention. A controlled collector can turn that flow into power for other machines. A controlled array of both begins to look like architecture. Consider a mirror that faces the sun. The mirror does not feel heat as a black surface would. It reflects most of what it receives, and with each reflection, it takes a tiny step away from the light. With careful aim, a mirror can also direct some of the reflected light slightly off-center, shaping where the momentum goes. It is like catching a river in a curved palm and sending a part of it back upstream. The river loses a little of its forward rush. The person, by conservation of momentum, leans in the opposite way. Replace the person with a star, and the idea becomes a blueprint for a stellar engine. Before that blueprint, it helps to feel the scale. The sun shines with about 400 billion watts. The number is immense, yet the sun is also massive beyond intuition. The push that light can give its parent is therefore small at any one moment. This is not a flaw in the plan, it is a feature. A constant small push, held for a very long time, is an instrument of grace. It does not tear the orbits of planets. It does not disturb tides. It writes its intention slowly into the path of the entire system. A single mirror is not enough. Millions would be better, each modest in size, each with its own guidance, each replacing itself when time and dust take their share. The heart of the engine is not any single surface but the swarm. Swarms forgive errors. They root around damage. They let a civilization build in pieces, launch in seasons, and learn while doing. Each launch is a lesson. Each mirror joins a chorus and listens for the tone that keeps the whole in tune. What would such mirrors be made of? At first, things we already understand. Thin films with shiny skins, optical coatings that despise heat and wear. In time, cleverer materials would appear, fabrics that align their molecules in light so they stiffen when the sun rises and relax when it sets. Surfaces that can change reflectivity on command. Membranes that heal as ice on a pond heals after a skater has passed. The selection is constrained by the same rule that governs all spacefaring tools. Mass is expensive, hardness is necessary. Simplicity is king over ambition. The control of light is both hardware and software. The hardware aims and holds. The software listens and decides. It listens to pressure sensors that feel the soft hands of photons. It listens to star monitors that watch for flares. It listens to a gravitational map that is updated by countless small probes which read the shape of the sun's field with their own orbits. When the wind of light changes, when a sunspot blooms, when the reflection of neighbours shifts the local pressure, each mirror responds with a tilt that looks insignificant alone and elegant in some. This is propulsion without propellant. It is a hard idea to love at first, because we have grown used to fire pushing against matter. Rockets exhaust a bright plume, the plume rushes one way, the vehicle rushes the other. Here the exhaust is light itself, and the reservoir of energy is the star. There is nothing to carry except the mirrors and their minds. Nothing is consumed except sunlight, and the sun was always going to spend that anyway. Light can also become power. Collector arrays that sit where the push holds firm can turn the river of photons into electricity, and electricity into beams, and beams into work. Once power flows, other engines can awaken. Magnetic nozzles can shape plasma. Ion thrusters can shepherd small bodies into placements that help the larger plane. The stellar engine becomes a family of engines that harmonize. Some push directly with light. Some push indirectly by powering devices that can grasp particles and fling them. The details differ. The sum points the same way. From Earth, the early stages would be invisible. Perhaps a faint glitter near the sun at certain angles, a subtle brightening at sunrise or sunset that is hard to tease from natural haze. As the swarm grows, delicate geometries would emerge, arcs and chains that catch the eye if you know where to look. There might be nights when a line of mirrors marks the ecliptic, like frost on a railing. There might be a rare day when a wafer drifts across the solar disk, and a careful observer notices a tiny artificial transit. Light is the softest propellant. It is also the most abundant in the neighbourhood of a star. It does not pollute, it does not run out, and it arrives already collimated from a source we know intimately. If we can learn to persuade it, we can turn sunlight into steering. If we can turn sunlight into steering, we can guide the sun. Next, we will bring the pieces together. A mirror that learns to hover, a balance between gravity and light, a slight misalignment that feeds a steady thrust into the star. The design has a quiet name. It is called a Shkadov Thruster. It does not look like an engine, as we have known engines. It looks like a patient idea that learned to reflect. On the sun's bright face, imagine a quiet crescent where light does not rush outward as freely as it wants to. Not a shadow that falls across worlds, but a hush, laid against the star itself. In that hush, photons turn back toward their source. Because light carries momentum, the star feels a small and steady hand. A Shkadov Thruster is the art of imbalance. A star that shines equally in every direction does not move, because the pushes cancel, interrupt a thin slice of that flow on one side and return it home. And the symmetry lifts. The recoil is tiny, yet it never stops. Drift begins, not with strain but with intention. For such a device to exist, something must hover, where ordinary orbits would fail. Gravity pulls a mirror inward. Radiation pressure pushes it away. At a particular aerial density, the two can be balanced by a measured tilt. Engineers call these creatures statites, stationary satellites that owe their suspension to light. A statite can hold the subsolar point like a bird hanging on a thermal, not by beating its wings, but by feeling the air. Balance is a conversation between mass and area. Too heavy, and gravity speaks louder. Too dark, and the pressure of sunlight whispers and is lost. Thin films, bright coatings, frames that waste nothing, these become the grammar of the structure. Each panel carries tiny sensors that feel pressure at the corners. Each panel learns to breathe with the star, tilting by fractions of a degree when the wind of light freshens or fades. A million small corrections dissolve into stillness. The thruster is not a single heroic sail. It is an arc, a slow reflective cradle that cups part of the star and bends a fraction of its shine back inward. Geometry matters. A shallow arc returns too little momentum. A deep arc drinks heat it cannot shed. The solution is a patient curve that reflects without tasting much warmth. Radiators bloom where the reflected beam does not live. Petals tuned to whisper waste energy. Away in wavelengths the sun will not return. In visible light, the arc is nearly invisible. In the infrared, it glows like a flower. Materials begin humble and clever rather than exotic. Metallized films that weigh less than paper. Lattices that resist creep. Coatings that do not brown in storming ultraviolet. Later, surfaces learn to change reflectivity with a voltage. Meshes stiffen under sunlight and relax in dusk. Microcracks knit with heat that would otherwise be wasted. The goal is not perfection, but repairability. Over centuries, time will find every flaw. The design invites time to help mend them. Even the sun has moods. Spots wander, Flares lift and fall. The outflow of particles thickens and thins. Stability is a craft built from gentle habits. Panels are given a slight natural curve, so that displaced surfaces feel a restoring urge. Patches that can darken on command act as tiny photon thrusters, providing trim without propellant. Guidance relies on redundancy rather than haste. Many weak actuators behave like one strong hand. If a seam fails, neighbours fold their light and carry the load until a maintenance cloud arrives. Micrometeoroids write their tiny signatures across every square kilometre. Dust grains strike at tens of kilometres per second and leave craters so small that only instruments care. The array is layered in places, multiple skins separated by empty centimetres that turn a piercing speck into a harmless spray. Sacrificial films wear and are replaced. Listening drones drift in black corridors and count the pings of impact, then glide to close the wounds. No workshop is ever quiet for long, yet from a distance the architecture looks asleep. From Earth, there would be very little spectacle at first. On a winter noon, a wafer might cross the solar disk and write a thin, artificial transit. Near sunrise, a keen eye might find a faint frost of glints low in the sky, too steady to be aircraft, too slow to be meteors. Most days there is only daylight. The work happens between the sun and emptiness does not complain when light is turned around. How much push does light give to something so large? The answer is modest, but deep time is generous to modesty. Imagine a constant feather touch, written into the sun's recoil. Year by year, it piles into meters per second. Century by century, it becomes kilometers per second. Planetary orbits barely notice. Tides keep their calm. Seasons do not flip, yet star maps drawn across ages start to show a gentle arc. A new line of travel that was not there before. Direction is written by where the arc lives. Face the cradle toward a quiet interarm lane where background radiation is a little kinder, and the system will begin to drift that way. Aim it to sidestep a cluster where massive stars are being born and dying young, and the system will ease along a safer curve. There is no sprint. The thruster edits the future course with a pencil stroke that does not need to be erased. The thruster is also a place to work. It can host collectors that sip what the mirrors do not return. That power runs the senses, the attitude control, and the factories tucked into shadowed bays. A small part of the array is always building the next small part. There is no single grand launch. There are seasons of shipments. Each crate holds panels, actuators, radiators, lacing, and little mines. Pieces float out and find their sockets. As they lock, control wakes and folds them into the wide breadth of the whole. The factories teach a new patience, the patience of slow abundance. A thin film can be printed from feedstock that began as metal in an asteroid. A frame can be woven from fibres that learned their tensile strength under a distant sun. There are no trucks and no roads. There are only gentle pushes, small tugs, and a web of rendezvous points where robots trade packages in silence. The loudest event is the opening of a folded membrane, a crisp sound that carries through nothing at all. Heat is an enemy that becomes a partner when it is told where to go. Every surface that drinks warmth has a path to give it away. Radiators lift like kites into cold darkness. They face regions of sky that the mirrors do not disturb. They glow in colour our eyes cannot see. To the machines, they are lovely. They bloom and fade with the star's cycle like a garden of invisible flowers. There is room here for culture as well as mechanics. The people who tend the ark will keep calendars of wind and flare. They will observe quiet protocols on storm days. Close the louvered screens, turn faces slightly aside, speak less on the open channels and more in the maintenance net. There will be stories of a hinge that lasted 5 cycles longer than spec, of an apprentice who noticed a tilt nobody else saw, of a seam that failed and was caught by neighbours, and how the patch that followed became a standard taught to children. Standing within the ark would feel like standing under a golden ocean. The sun would fill most of the sky not as a disk, but as an enveloping field of light. you would feel nothing but the long persuasion of balance, turn outward, and the planets would hang like lanterns on black cords. Somewhere, a blue world would be preparing breakfast, held inside a calm that it did not know it owed to a patient machine. It is fair to ask whether we could do more than bend light. Could we place engines that grab the solar wind and squeeze it into a jet? Could we harvest plasma from the corona, heat it, and exhale it with a magnetic nozzle? The answer is yes, but those are louder arts. They need a power infrastructure and a logistics chain. They ask for a necklace of machines that reaches all the way around. A family of statites transformed into a swarm that can share energy and work like cells in a living tissue. The Shkadov Thruster is the first letter in the word for moving a sun. It teaches balance and repair. It proves that light alone can write a direction into the future. To write in longer lines, the single arc must learn to meet its neighbours until the night near the sun begins to show faint geometry, and a slow necklace rises where emptiness used to be. At first there is only the arc, a quiet crescent holding its balance between gravity and light. Then come neighbours. A second arc finds its place, then a third, until the sun is attended not by a single reflective hush, but by a growing company of statites and orbiters that keep one another in tune. The pattern that emerges is not a solid shell. It is a constellation of many small minds, arranged in careful lanes, each one simple, the sum complex and calm. The necklace begins as rings. Engineers like rings because they are easy to reason about, and because rings can be phased so their members never meet. One family circles the sun in the ecliptic, mirrors yawed so their reflections feed the great arc. Another family climbs into a slight tilt, then another climbs higher, until the sky near the sun carries a set of gentle latitudes, like the ribs of a lantern. Every ring has its traffic rules. There are keep-out cones for maintenance. There are timing slots so launches can merge without breaking or burn. There are protocols that teach each unit to whisper to its neighbours, to share pressure, to trade load, to step aside when a flare scours the field. Some members hover, supported by radiation pressure. Others are in slow, near-solar orbits and use small photon thrusters to stay in their assigned lanes. The mixture is deliberate. Hovers offer precision, where the thrust geometry must be exact. Orbiters offer resilience because an orbit persists when power fails. Together, they give the swarm what living tissues have, redundancy in kind as well as number. Multiplying mirrors without multiplying risk is the central craft. The sky is huge, but collision is not allowed to be a teacher. Phasing keeps neighbours apart. Station keeping keeps lanes clean. Each unit carries a simple awareness of its sphere of influence, a bubble that it promises not to puncture. When a guidance glitch grows, the promise is to darken, to stop reflecting, to feather radiators, to become as transparent to momentum as possible until a shepherd drone arrives. Shepherds are not glamorous. They are the tugboats of an inland sea, stout, slow, and present wherever duty is dull. What should the pieces be made of? Early mirrors are familiar technology stretched to new grace, metallized films a few microns thick. Honeycomb frames that weigh less than a leaf, but hold their shape across a kilometre. Optics that disdain the sun's hard ultraviolet. Coatings that shed dust. Over time, materials evolve. Membranes that change reflectivity with a voltage allow fine control without motion. Metasurfaces sculpt phase at the scale of wavelengths, so a flat sheet can act like a shallow curve. Lattices stiffen in sunlight and relax when it fades, which allows folding and repairs without hinges. The swarm is not brittle. It is supple in a way that makes time an ally. Where do all these pieces come from? Not from Earth for long. The cost of climbing out of a gravity well scales badly with ambition. The feedstock lives in the inner system, in metal-rich asteroids, in Mercury, like bodies that are already welded by the sun. An early generation of robots learns to smelt in vacuum, to print frames, to plate films, to bake thin optical stacks and test them with starlight. When a unit passes its tests, it steps off a cradle and lets the sun catch it. A very old industrial dream is fulfilled. We stop sending finished goods. We send seeds of capability and allow capability to grow where it will be used. Power circulates through the necklace as light and as beam. Some members reflect only. Others are collectors that turn sunlight into electricity. The collectors power their own housekeeping. Then surplus flows outward as microwave or as laser, depending on the task and the distance. Tight beams feed builders. Wider beams bathe maintenance docks. Emergency beams watch for instability and give a failing neighbour a moment of strength. The network is not a single line. It is a mesh that roots around noise, storms and accidents, so that no safe mode becomes a silence. Heat management becomes a quiet art. Every mirror that returns light inward must reject the warmth it cannot help absorbing. Radiators are not afterthoughts. They are petals and tails arranged so they never look into the reflected beam. They shine in wavelengths the sun does not flood, painting an invisible garden in the infrared. As the swarm grows, thermal choreography grows with it. Timing reflections so that neighbours do not toast one another, scheduling high-load operations for the cool minutes when the sun's face is quieter. The necklace needs a shared clock. Sunlight itself carries a rhythm, a modulated beat that every unit can hear with a star tracker and a sliver of sensor. On top of that natural metronome, the swarm runs timekeeping that learns to survive failure. Clocks are averaged, outliers are ignored. No single tick maker holds the group hostage. Consensus algorithms are not poetry, yet they allow millions of devices that never meet to act as if they understand one another's intent. When a member drifts, the consensus draws it back. When a sector goes blind during a storm, consensus routes flows around the dark. From Earth, the necklace becomes evident in moments when geometry lines up. Near dawn and dusk, faint arcs appear like frost on a rail. During eclipses of the inner planets, silhouettes cross the solar disk that are too neat to be natural. Once in a while, the sky offers a glint, a stationary star near the sun that should not exist. Weathered observatories learn to record such signals without fanfare. New amateurs write down times they see the frost and compare notes in quiet forums. The presence overhead is not a billboard. It is more like the knowledge that bridges exist to the west, that freight moves at night, that the city breathes while you sleep. As the count rises, interesting possibilities open. The swarm can paint patterns in solar wind density, not as art, but as practice for control. It can trim the pressure on one side while relaxing it on the other, teaching the system to feel the way a ship feels a rudder. It can learn to schedule reflections so that the Shkadov arc receives a steadier diet of momentum, even when the sun's face is spotted and moody. It can test emergency postures, the way a pilot lifts the nose for an engine out landing and comes home smooth. The necklace is not free in the way a day is free, but it is far cheaper than lifting thunder. A rocket for every square kilometre would be madness. A patient assembly line in sunlight becomes sanity. Pieces self-sort. Dust is warned away. Every month a small change in reflectivity yields a measured change in thrust. Every year, the ledger shows a tiny increase in velocity that is not erased. Over centuries, the arc of travel widens into a real path, and the quiet drift of the sun begins to have a destination. All of this needs custodians, and custodians become a culture. Their year is not our year. It is tied to the star's cycle and to orbital resonances. They keep storm calendars. They tell stories about the great flare that once arrived a week early and found everyone ready. They have rituals for the day. A young engineer retires a panel that outlived its specification by 5 cycles. And rituals for the moment, a replacement wakes, feels the wind and joins the tone. Their art is modest and precise. It praises details that saved a sector from a ripple nobody else noticed. Even with such care, entropy writes its small graffiti everywhere. Micrometeoroids stitch the films. Coatings age under ultraviolet electronics wear. The remedy is not denial, it is flow. Units are always moving along maintenance loops that carry them through depots with eyes and hands. Faults are found, fixes are made, and the perished are melted and returned to stock. The swarm is a recycler in spirit. It keeps as little waste as a forest keeps when leaves fall. There is a question that passes among the builders when the shifts grow quiet. Is light alone enough? Light is abundant and safe. It writes slow lines without ripping the pages below. Yet once a necklace exists, there are braver notes we can play. We can take power from collectors and use it to shape the solar wind into a jet. We can taste plasma from the corona and guide it through magnetic nozzles so it leaves the star with intention. That is a louder art, but the necklace is exactly what such an art requires, a patient grid of power and control that can feed and steer a new kind of breath. Stand beneath the necklace in your mind and feel the tone it keeps. The sun shines, mirrors listen, collectors drink, radiators bloom and fade, and the whole arrangement leans, almost invisibly, toward a chosen future. It is a lullaby written in light and maintenance. It is enough to begin the journey. When the day comes to deepen the push, the same lattice that catches photons will light furnaces in the thin plasma and teach the star to exhale in a chosen direction. A quiet lesson that turns flow into thrust and a slow drift into a deliberate voyage. In the thin brightness around a star there is a wind. Not air, but a stream of charged particles, a steady drift of protons and electrons that flows outward into the dark. It is faint near Earth and fierce near the sun. It ripples with cycles, flares and storms. If you bring the right instruments into that wind, and if you feed them with light gathered by a vast necklace of mirrors, the wind can be shaped. It can be persuaded to become a jet. A Caplan Drive begins as a hovering engine that never lands and never orbits in the usual way. It holds position sunward, balanced between gravity and thrust. Behind it, magnet coils hum with captured power beamed from collectors. In front of it, a magnetic mouth opens into a scoop that drinks the solar wind. The scoop does not touch anything. It uses fields to gather and guide. What it gathers becomes propellant. The heart of the drive is a chamber that never sees walls. Magnetic bottles hold plasma in invisible hands. Within those hands, the fuel is heated and pushed, and when the bottle opens into a nozzle, a beam of plasma leaves at tremendous speed. There are two nozzles. One points outward, away from the sun. One points inward, toward it. The outward jet pushes the engine sunward, keeping it aloft against gravity. The inward jet strikes the stellar wind and the corona, transfers momentum to the star, and writes a small acceleration into its path. The symmetry is deliberate. Without the inward jet, the engine would simply flee. With it, the craft hovers at a chosen distance, while the star receives a constant nudge. The power that drives those nozzles is sunlight collected elsewhere and sent across space as beams. Mirrors and statites drink the star's radiance, convert it, and feed it back to the hovering engine that returns a fraction as ordered thrust. Nothing in this arrangement is violent in the human sense. There is no explosion, no roar, only the hiss of ions and the quiet confidence of fields. The exhaust speeds are high, because high exhaust speed yields more thrust for the same mass flow. The mass flow itself is drawn from the source that will never run out in our time. The wind the star would have blown anyway. When the wind softens, the scoop opens wider. When it grows wild, the fields stiffen and the nozzles throttle down to keep the hover true. The design allows for more than passive intake. The necklace around the sun can kindle patches of the lower corona with carefully timed beams. Warm a small region, and the local outflow thickens and slows. The scoop tastes the change and harvests more easily. This is not starlifting at the scale of mining. It is pressure gardening. The goal is not to remove mass, but to write momentum into the flow, then collect enough to keep the engine fed. Hovering near a star is not a single trick. Gravity varies with distance. Radiation pressure varies with angle and activity. The drive learns to breathe in place. It trims its attitude by changing the brightness of small panels that feel the photons directly. It leans into gusts of particles as a kite leans into wind. It holds station not with brute force but with timing and a web of predictions that are constantly revised by sensors watching the sun's face. The magnetic scoop is a strange kind of net. Lines of force catch charged particles and turn them, like currents turning a school of fish. Dust grains are ignored. Neutral atoms are ionized at the edge and invited into the flow. The scoop's throat ends in a region where the plasma is dense enough for work. There, coils and radio waves heat it, squeeze it, and calm its turbulence. The plasma becomes obedient. It becomes a pen for writing thrust. The inward nozzle must be gentle with the star. A directed jet that bites too hard would carve a scar and raise a storm. The beam is therefore broad at the end of its reach. It couples to the corona and the wind, not to the deeper layers. Momentum transfer spreads across a patch, and the patch relaxes in seconds and returns to its normal roar. To an observer, a half astronomical unit away, the star looks unchanged. To the inertial map, it begins to drift. Engineers love numbers, and the numbers here are patient. The thrust on the star is small but constant. Over 1,000 years, that smallness becomes a few kilometers per second. Over 1,000,000, it becomes a migration worth drawing on a galactic chart. The craft hovers through all of it with slight adjustments, migrated by nothing, anchored to nothing, living in a balance that looks like a held breath. Nothing prevents multiple engines. A family of Caplan Drives can hang at different longitudes and latitudes, all fed by the same power web, all tuned to point their inward jets at an agreed direction. If one fails, the rest can take up the slack. If the sun flares hard in a region where a jet would misbehave, that engine sleeps for a while, and its neighbours lean in a little more. The control network that was built to align mirrors now aligns a set of star breathers. Safety is an ethic, not a module. Every engine carries quiet protocols. If beam power drops below a threshold, the inward jet dims first. If a guidance loop drifts, the nozzles rotate to neutral, and the craft becomes transparent to momentum until shepherds arrive. If a flare rises too fast, the engine tucks its scoop, rotates its tail toward the heat, and rides the gust with surfaces that can afford it. 1,000 small failure paths end in the same posture, a calm wait rather than an exciting mistake. Power that begins as sunlight does not have to arrive only as electricity. Some beams can be microwave for efficiency and breadth. Some can be optical for precision. Some can be pulsed, so their information rides along, and the engine's reflexes sharpen as the weather changes. Power depots in the necklace buffer energy through storms. When the sun sleeps and its face is clean, modest surplus flows into batteries that spend their charge during the next busy dawn. From a blue world far away, signs would be subtle. Occasional radio whispers from the control net. Faint emissions from the nozzles in wavelengths few eyes can see. Over generations, astronomers would refine measurements of the sun's proper motion and find a tiny anomaly that matches the direction the engines work. The people cooking breakfast would remain untroubled, their shadows falling as always, their seasons unmoved by the long project happening upstream. The Caplan Drive has a broader talent than pushing a star. It is a chemistry teacher for plasma. It learns to separate, to heat just so, to shape flow with field lines, and let it relax without turbulence. Those arts spill outward into the maintenance of the necklace, into the factories that build the next mirrors, into the long practice of managing a heliosphere with intention. Cosmic rays can be modulated a little by the state of the wind. Dust lanes can be thinned with patience near the ecliptic. The system becomes a garden not through dominance but through informed nudges. Critics will say that such engines are overreach. The answer is that the intent is modest. No one is trying to race. No one is lighting a torch to the sky. The work is to give the sun a preference. A slight lean might carry a family of worlds away from a future noisy neighbourhood. A slight lean might move through interarm lanes where backgrounds are kinder to atmospheres and biologies. The cost is attention and a willingness to build slowly. The reward is time. It is natural to worry about the worlds while all this is happening. Every push on the star is a push on their centre. Orbits will follow the drift. Resonances and tides must stay tame. There are gentle ways to keep them so. Tiny station keeping nudges at key moments. Moon shepherding that respects the dance. Tunings to the engines that avoid writing ripples into the plane of planets. The same culture that learned to hold an engine steady will learn to hold a system steady through calendars, algorithms, and habits that praise caution. The necklace glints in the sky near the sun. The breathers hover upstream and write a faint intention into the wind. In the dark between them, the planets circle as they always have, and the quiet work is to keep that circling quiet while the whole ship, unseen by its passengers, sets a new course through the galaxy. The first responsibility of a migrating star is simple to say and hard to forget. Do not wake the garden. Let the seasons keep their rhythm. Let tides breathe as they always have. Let dawn arrive where it should, and let children grow up under skies that do not know they are sailing. A star that moves by gentle intention can keep this promise. The accelerations are faint, far smaller than the grip of the sun on any planet. At Earth's distance, solar gravity is many thousands of times stronger than the slow push written by mirrors and breathers. In that imbalance lies safety. The orbits do not shatter. They ride along as fish ride the current of a river that has decided to wander. Physicists have a quiet phrase for this kind of care: adiabatic, change so slow that the deep patterns of motion are preserved. The shapes of the ellipses keep their character. Their periods keep their music. There is a small polarization, a slight preference for the direction the system leans, but it is not a shove. It is more like a posture, a tilt that is noticed only by instruments that never blink. Even so, the garden is watched. Each world carries a light web of custodians, a necklace within the larger necklace. At the Lagrange points, the places where a planet and the sun balance one another, stations keep time. At L1 and L2, where satellites sit in line with a planet and its star, arrays listen to pressure, to plasma, to the whisper of light. At L4 and L5, where gravity draws two equilateral triangles in space, tugs idle with full batteries and empty calendars, ready to escort a stray rock or to nudge a lost satellite back into a lane. The custodians are small compared to planets, yet they are large in attention. They maintain clocks so precise that single grains of dust would show up as errors if they had crossed the beam. They compare catalogues of orbits against new measurements and look for slow drifts that do not belong. When they see one, they do not hurry. They schedule a trim at an orbital node, a place where a tiny touch has the loudest consequence. And they spend a few centimeters per second of ion propellant to erase a century of deviation. The Earth and Moon dance with an intimacy that deserves more than a glance. The Moon's slow march outward is an inheritance from tides, a very old story that will outlast any engine by eons. A migrating sun does not change this rhythm. It adds only the tiniest undertone. Even that undertone is measured. Laser pulses bounce from corner cubes left on the lunar plane half a century ago, and from their return time, the distance is known to a millimetre. If a resonance ever threatened to sharpen, a small fleet of lunar shepherds would adjust orbits of mass that does not matter. A handful of captured boulders, so the tides they stir in the mantle stay where they belong. The goal is not to force the dance, it is to keep the floor level. Further out, the giants carry their own weather in gravity. Jupiter sculpts the asteroid belt. Saturn sings to its moons. Uranus and Neptune hold long ellipses that drift with dignity. The engines upstream are careful with these elders. Thrust directions avoid writing secular ripples into the planetary plane. Schedules skip moments when a small lean could add energy to a resonance. The guidance that keeps a mirror steady is reworked here into a tide calendar written for worlds. The belt between Mars and Jupiter is full of memory. Family names in rock, fossils of early collisions, pathways that cross and recross. As the sun begins to drift, the belt changes hardly at all, yet the custodians do not assume. They map resonances and give them wide berths. They keep slow gravity tractors on a handful of bodies with dangerous futures. A gravity tractor is not a tug in the usual sense. It hovers a little to the side and lets mutual attraction do the work. Over months, then years, the tiny pull line shifts a rock's path by a safe fraction of a degree. Over decades, that fraction becomes a gulf. Comets are another kind of story. The Oort cloud is a long, lonely shiver of ice and stone far beyond the outer planets, bound to the sun so lightly that the galaxy's tide can tug at its edge. As the system migrates, there will be eras when a passing density wave in the Milky Way turns a handful of comets inward. This was always true. Now it is planned for. Deep watch posts live far beyond Neptune, sparse, lean and patient. They taste faint motion in the dark, the way a spider feels a footfall on a strand. When a long-period comet wakes, they send word years in advance. The inner system answers with a choreography of inspections and tiny burns. No single hero turns a mountain of ice. Familiar physics and polite lead times do. Climate is kept steady not by constant intervention, but by staying out of the way. The engines are already gentle. Even so, the sun's voice is monitored at the level of small variations. The necklace can soften an occasional spike of ultraviolet, timed to harmless minutes, by asking collectors to drink a little more. It can dim a fraction of a percent for an hour during a rare flare that would otherwise rattle power grids and satellites. These are not weather machines. They're umbrellas opened in a passing squall, snapped shut the moment the rain is gone. The heliosphere, that great bubble carved in the interstellar medium by solar wind, learns new habits. Caplan breathers hand a little order into the outflow, so the bubble becomes slightly less ragged in the favoured direction. Eddies shrink. Cosmic rays, those ancient messengers from far explosions, are modulated by the state of the wind and deflected a touch more kindly around the ecliptic. Telescopes on the night side of worlds count fewer spurious tracks on plates. Electronics suffer fewer silent flips. DNA endures a little less insult. No one notices on any given Tuesday. Over lifetimes, the ledger leans toward health. Satellites, the city lights of orbit, need a different kind of keeping. Their clocks are sharpened daily against the planetary web. Their paths are trimmed to respect new traffic lanes around Lagrange stations. The navigation math includes, as a quiet term, the small acceleration of the central star. It is not dramatic. It is one more line in an ephemeris. A technician reads it aloud at a console and checks a box that says the field has been reconciled. Infrastructure keeps its calm because such boxes are checked by habit. To keep a system steady is as much culture as it is mathematics. There are days reserved for trims and days reserved for leaving well enough alone. There is a practice of writing down rules that begin with the word unless. Unless a flare rises faster than expected, do not touch the angles. Unless the resonance crosses a threshold, do not spend propellant. Unless the comet will miss by less than a planetary radius, do not schedule a gravity tractor. The exceptions protect attention. A day of the trim, when schools watch the numbers scroll and learn why 1/10 of a millimetre per second is worth a cheer. A night of listening. When the necklace dives to low power and everyone watches the solar face in quiet, because storms have a way of teaching even old hands a new humility. A small ceremony, when a station that has held watch at L1 for 2 cycles steps aside for its child. There is pride in longevity, but there is more pride in yielding at the right time. Occasionally there is an anomaly that refuses to behave, a dust veil that thickens where no model predicted it should, a trickle of debris that dances just outside Jupiter's hill sphere and will not disperse. A shepherd drone makes a long, slow expedition under beamed power and spends a season learning what wind and light do to pebbles in a changing frame. Its report adds a paragraph to the book, and the next time the paragraph is read, an engineer who is not yet born will nod. The system teaches itself by remembering. Even the smallest choices are made with the planets in mind. When a Caplan engine adjusts its inward jet, it does so on a timetable that avoids transits by worlds. When a ring of mirrors brightens to smooth the momentum diet of the Shkadov arc, it dims again in minutes, well before the change could write a measurable note into the orbital plane. A million such courtesies add up to a policy. Move the star, keep the planets quiet, never let the tail wag the dog. In the far cold, where the Oort cloud blends with the galaxy's breath, sentinels drift and relay the faintest news of tides. In the near warmth at each world, tiny coach lights at the Lagrange points hold their stations and keep time. Between them, paths are swept, wakefulness is shared, and the ship of worlds moves without a ripple on the T. When a system can be kept this steady, another question follows. Where should it go? If danger and calm are not evenly spread, if starbirth is noisy and interarm space is a sanctuary, if dust lanes hide and show themselves by seasons that last 100 million years, then a route must be chosen with care. The engines can lean, the necklace can listen, the maps of the galaxy can be drawn not as pictures, but as weather, and a patient finger can trace a line through the quiet. Navigation begins with listening. The necklace leans a little, the breathers exhale with care, and ahead of the slow ship, a mesh of scouts fans out into the dark. They move on quiet beams of power and report by narrow threads of radio that no storm can drown. Their work is patient reconnaissance. Taste the medium, count the grains, read the field. The galaxy is not empty space. It is a sea with weather. On the largest scales, the Milky Way is a spiral river. Arms are places where gas and dust are shepherded into crowding lanes, where massive stars are born, live bright, and die hard. Between the arms lie the broad interarm planes, thinner in gas, quieter in radiation, gentler in surprises. Our course favours the planes. The engines do not sprint. They write a preference, a steady lean, that moves the sun toward regions where background noise softens, where the heliosphere can billow wide, and where comets are less often teased from the far cold. Finding these lanes is a craft that fuses many senses. Hydrogen whispers at a wavelength of 21 centimetres, a line that threads through dust and tells where the neutral gas lies. Carbon monoxide marks the densest molecular clouds, the birthplaces of blue giants that will end in shock. Pulsars tick like lighthouses through the night, their radio beats slowed by free electrons between. That delay reveals the depth of ionized fog along the path. Starlight rotates as it passes through magnetic fields, a twist that gives the direction and strength of the invisible wires that run through the disk. Each of these signals is a swell on the galactic sea. Together they make charts. The scouts carry small spectrometers and dust counters and magnetometers that love faintness. They sniff for heavy elements in the drifting grains. They read isotopes that betray ancient explosions, iron and nickel, and the ash of long-dead supernovae. They sample the spectrum of cosmic rays, the hard rain of charged particles that arrives from far engines, and track how the flux shifts with latitude above and below the plane. When a boundary is crossed, when a bubble of hot gas yields to a cooler cloud, when a fold in the magnetic field changes, the way the wind scatters, the change is recorded and sent back, not as alarm, but as weather. The sun's own motion supplies a gentle baseline. It circles the galactic centre in a period that swallows civilizations whole, gliding at a speed that would cross a continent in a heartbeat. It wobbles above and below the mid-plane on a scale that slow geology would recognize. These motions continue while the engines add a slight preference. The guidance mind treats the Milky Way as a rotating flow with patterns that move of their own accord. Spiral structure drifts with a pattern speed. Bars and waves shift the tide. The task is not to fight that current, but to find the set of lines where drift and preference work together, and the ship moves with a sailor's economy. There are hazards that are better admired at a distance. Giant molecular clouds weigh like continents, and can tug at orbits for a long time if the ship grazes their edges. OB associations, shine with ultraviolet that can sand the ozone from a world and shake chemistry awake when sleep would be kinder. Supernova remnants billow with magnetic knots and shock fronts that rattle the heliosphere into a smaller shell. None of this is doom. All of it is navigable with time and knowledge. A lane to one side of a cloud, a turn that places the ship in the lee of a remnant, a choice to cross the mid-plane when the local tides are mild. These are the slow gestures of the helm. Wayfinding also means respecting resonance. The disk is not a uniform track. There are radii where the angular speed of the sun happens to meet the pattern speed of arms or the bar. Sit at such a place inattentive, and a subtle tug can repeat often enough to matter. Keep a slight offset, and repetition becomes rarity. The map the scouts draw is therefore more than a picture. It is a chart of repeating influences, a catalogue of "do not linger here," a list of places where a small lean now avoids long negotiations later. The necklace becomes part of the sensing organ. Every mirror has a pressure skin that feels the photon wind. Every collector that looks outward can devote a sliver of time to spectroscopy. Together, they watch the faint glow of interstellar sodium and potassium absorbed against background stars. They trace filaments of dust by how they polarize starlight. They read the pale microwave hush of the sky for signs of cold clouds that the eye would never see. The result is a living atlas. Lines are redrawn when storms pass. Preferred corridors shift by almost nothing in a human year, by an elegant amount in 1,000. Pulsars serve as a deep clock and a frame. Their flashes let the ship triangulate without trusting any local beacon. Time of arrival is a ruler that ignores dust and forgetting. The navigation mind carries a catalogue of hundreds. It weights them by stability and position, and it uses their combined rhythm to know the sun's place, to a precision that would have made ancient navigators drop oars and stare. In quiet minutes, apprentices play a game. Mask the pulses from 3 and steer by the rest. Mask 5, mask 10. Learn how redundancy saves you when one lighthouse flickers. Even gravity is read as weather. Tidal streams from disrupted clusters write faint rivers through the halo. Slow arcs of stars that fell out of order long ago cross such a stream at a shallow angle, and the ship feels a whisper in its long bones. The scouts plot these features and give them names. The names enter calendars. They advise a slight adjustment of the Shkadov arc in a century that lies ahead, the kind of note that will sit in the ledger for a long time and then be obeyed on a day when nobody remembers the author. The heliosphere responds to the map like a sail responds to swell. In thin regions it swells, in thick regions it tightens. The Caplan breathers can soften sharp gradients by crafting a little order in the wind. They do not remove roughness, they teach it to be rounder where the planets would prefer round. Cosmic rays answer, fewer high-energy messengers, slipping through when the wind is keen and tuned, a touch more during slacker seasons. Telescopes turn this into data, then into small revisions of the route, then into sleep for minds that would otherwise worry. Wayfinding is also stewardship of opportunity. The ship hunts not only for safety, but for knowledge. There are comets worth tasting, dust lanes worth sampling, nebular edges worth crossing to see how chemistry changes from one side to the other. The scouts propose excursions that do not cost the main route, a slight bend to visit a quiet supershell and listen to its fossil wind, a slower drift through a region where magnetic domains tile the sky, so maps of field lines can be tested and corrected. These digressions are written into the voyage in pencil, then inked when the cost is small and the curiosity honest. Communication is a keel. If the scouts speak and the necklace hears, the route holds. If storms blind a sector, the mesh routes around the dark, and the hold still holds. Clocks disagree only by specs. Consensus code waits a patient interval and never chooses a plan on the first impulse. The whole posture is conservative. It prefers a corridor that needs one correction to a corridor that promises none and then demands 3. It values a route with more watch posts even when the medium says the space is clean. The ethic is slow safety, not proud cleverness. People at home are invited to feel only the wonder. Constellations drift over long lives as they always did. The ecliptic glows with the zodiacal dust as it always has. Some nights the frost of mirrors is visible near the sun. Some years a careful observer measures the proper motion of the star and finds a whisper more than the tables predicted. Children learn that the sky is steady because many hands keep it so. They draw the galaxy in crayon with a small line that shows our lane, and the smallness makes them smile. Route planning draws on traditions older than mathematics. There is a memory of sailors who read swells under clouds, who watched birds at dawn, who tasted wind on the tongue and named it. The galaxy has its version of these signs. Neutral hydrogen hums where it is thick. Polarized starlight leans with the grain of dust. The pulse dispersion from a familiar pulsar lengthens by a measured breath, and you know a veil lies between. The culture of the helm collects such cues with quiet respect. A drawer in the chart room holds notes that begin with phrases like, "When the sodium line bends by this many parts in a million, prefer the high latitude corridor for 2 cycles, then come down again." The voyage includes margins. There are planned harbours along the way, literal volumes of space where instruments can rest, where the wind is mild, where repair swarms can loiter without fighting pressure. The route bends through these havens every so often, not because the engines must stop to catch breath, but because calendars of renewal ask for places where accidents are unlikely, and where the scaffold of beamed power is especially thick. Some of these harbours are chosen near quiet clusters for the sake of their beautiful skies. Work does not forbid beauty. Not every signal is clear on first hearing. Sometimes 2 maps disagree. One says the magnetic field is laid like combed hair, another says it tangles in knots. In those cases, the ship tests the world. The breathers alter the wind in a small sector. The necklace eases its posture for a week. The scouts pause and watch how cosmic rays answer. In a month, the data resolve, and the charts gain confidence. Patience is better than bravado. Experiments are better than vows. A good route is not a thin line. It is a corridor with room to turn. It is a schedule with days left empty on purpose. The sun glides along that corridor. The engines continue their soft music, and the neighbourhoods change in a way that instruments can prove and people can ignore. There will be a time ahead when the ship comes near a region of quiet stars whose births are old. The sky there will be clean and sparse. Nights will carry more distant light and fewer loud neighbours. That is a promise worth the work. Between waypoints and weather, there remains the simple fact that a ship this large must be kept. Charts and routes mean little if the surfaces that catch light and the coils that hold plasma do not endure. Dust will whisper across films. Joints will creep, then crack. Coatings will age in radiation that knows no boredom. The next task belongs to those who mend what time finds, who teach a necklace to renew itself, and who keep the tone of the engines steady while the voyage carries on. A migrating star is not moved by genius alone, it is kept by caretakers. The necklace shines because 1,000 small hands never stop mending, swapping, polishing, listening. Time is the slowest weather in space, and maintenance is learning to read it. The hazards are quiet but constant. Ultraviolet hardens coatings and makes them brittle. Charged particles embrittle lattices and salt electronics with single-bit flips. Thermal cycling loosens joints by a hair each season. Micrometeoroids stitch pinholes through films so thin that sunlight can drum on them like skin. None of this is dramatic. All of it is inevitable. The art is to design so failure arrives softly, is noticed early, and is easy to heal. Health begins with sensing. Every static carries strain gauges at the corners and a pressure skin that feels the palm of photons. Radiators report their glow. Dust counters click when grains pass. Tiny spectrum sniffers watch coatings fade line by line and whisper when a layer has aged enough to be replaced. The signals braid into a single slow pulse the custodians call tone. When the tone drifts, the unit darkens, withdraws a little from the reflected beam, and waits for help. Help lives everywhere. Maintenance loops thread the necklace, gentle highways that carry shepherd drones and repair skiffs along predictable routes. Depots sit in the cool cones behind collectors, stocked with folded films, spare actuators, control boards, and pallets of optical coatings. A skiff arrives at a darkened unit, matches posture, latches with quiet fingers, and begins work that looks like gardening. A bruised panel is unpinned and guided into a recycler. A fresh membrane is unfolded into light. A seam is annealed by sunlight, focused through a small lens, then brushed with a protective glaze that hates ultraviolet. The unit brightens again, feels for the wind, and returns to the tone. Recycling is not a slogan, it is survival. Launching mass from a deep gravity well to feed 1 million square kilometers of optics would bankrupt patience. The feedstock is local. Robots mine small asteroids and scorched metal in Mercury's neighborhood. They smelt in vacuum, print trusses, plate films, and bake thin optical stacks until the layers sing true under starlight. Scrap flows back to these print farms as calmly as leaves fall to soil. Losses exist, but the loop holds. Power for repair is never begged from the engines. Collectors allocate a steady tithe to depots, stored as flywheels and batteries that do not care about day or night. During storms, that reserve carries the loops. During quiet hours, surplus power runs diagnostic ovens that heat electronics to coax out early failures, and cryobaths that chill bearings to test their temper. Weak parts quit in safety, not in service. Apprentices learn to love a graph that bends just before it would have broken. Dust asks for manners rather than fear. The necklace routes reflections to avoid kicking grit towards neighbours. Fields are used as brooms. When a lane is fouled by a slow drizzle of pebble-sized debris, shepherds post a temporary cone that traffic respects without argument. The cone is not an order barked on a radio. It is a change in the shared map that every unit carries and consults. Consensus code keeps the map honest. No single unit can lie loudly enough to endanger the rest. Storms write a separate chapter of habits. The sun spits from time to time, and the breath is hot. When sensors on the near side see a flare rise, a storm watch passes through the mesh at the speed of light. Reflectors feather. Breathers fold their scoops and turn their backs. Depots call in skiffs from open lanes. The system takes the wind on surfaces that can afford it, then opens again. Protocols are simple sentences that everyone knows. Close here, dim there, wait, resume. The rules are old enough to be trusted and young enough to have been rewritten by lessons that nobody is ashamed to learn. Clocks keep the web sane. The necklace runs on a shared time that is averaged and cross-checked against pulsars. When storms fry a corner of the grid, the time there drifts by only a heartbeat before neighbours pull it back. Updates happen slowly, on purpose. Patience filters out panic. Maintenance schedules lean on that clock like farmers lean on seasons. This week is for radiators in Band 8. Next week is for small actuators in Ring 3. Nothing important depends on one day. Everything important depends on all days. Humans remain in the loop, but not in the hazard. Work crews live in shadowed yards tucked behind thick collectors, under slow spin for comfort. They tend printer farms, calibrate optics, teach robots new chores, audit code, and study old failures for the pleasure of improving a sentence. They also keep rituals that make a place a home. A bell rings when a panel that outlived its specification by 5 cycles finally retires. A youngster reads the names of the teams who kept it alive. A new membrane wakes, catches its first sunlight, and someone somewhere applauds. Even wisdom ages. Code written when the first arc was raised will not fit perfectly forever. Review is a craft of its own. Simulators run yesterday's decisions against tomorrow's weather and mark the lines that need brightening. Documentation is written in plain speech as well as equation. so that a careful child could learn the reasons without flattery and a tired expert could remember them without pride. The style guide rewards caution more than cleverness. It prefers a checklist that ends in "do nothing" to a checklist that ends in "try this, just in case." The hardest failures are not dramatic. They are subtle drifts that everyone almost accepts. A mirror's reflectivity falls a fraction. A radiator warms by a degree. A Shepherd drone needs 2 days instead of 1 to close a lane. The tone still sounds fine, but the harmony is less sweet than it was. In those moments, maintenance becomes listening. Teams meet in calm, compare notes without blame, and decide whether the ledger of small surrenders has begun to matter. Then they trim, repolish, rewrite, and the sweetness returns. All of this is for one reason that is not metal. The necklace must keep singing so the engines can keep their soft push. If the tone holds, the breathers keep their hover. If the hover holds, the star's preference persists. If that preference persists, the ship of worlds crosses the slow weather of the galaxy without waking the garden. The work is humble and endless, but it buys a future measured in gentle maps rather than urgent corrections. If you step back from the depots and the lanes, the effect is almost invisible. Light continues to be turned, pressure continues to be guided, heat continues to be thrown into the long night. All that changes is the sky we live under, by inches each lifetime, by constellations across ages. Somewhere beneath the necklace, a blue world turns, and people lift their faces in evening and see small signs that everything is held. A faint frost near the sun, a quieter storm than last cycle. A pattern of stars shifted by a hair from the charts their grandparents learned. Those nights carry their own kind of music, and it is there that the voyage becomes a story worth telling. Night begins as it always does, with the world exhaling its heat and the sky filling with old light. Street lamps warm to their patient colour. Windows go dim one by one. Above the roofs and the trees, the constellations take their places and pretend they have never moved. To an eye that lives for decades, they are faithful companions. To an eye that thinks in eras, they are slow swimmers in a deep river, turning their heads by inches as the sun and its family drift. There are small signs, if you learn to look for them. Near the horizon before dawn, the ecliptic wears a faint scarf of brightness, the zodiacal light that rises from dust in the plane of the planets. On some mornings, that scarf is more orderly than it used to be, its grains smoothed by the necklace that drinks and redirects sunlight. The smoothness is subtle, it hides inside early hours and late evenings, and it rewards eyes that love quiet changes. At certain seasons, a thin frost appears near the sun's resting place, not a blaze, not a banner, only a scatter of impossible steadiness that holds its position as birds cross and satellites streak. The frost is the light of many small faces that hover where gravity and sunlight cancel into calm. Most nights it is not there at all. The system prefers to be invisible. When it shows itself, it feels like an admission that something vast is awake, and that its waking does not disturb your sleep. Once in a long while, a wafer glides across the solar disk at noon and writes a hairline transit that only a telescope can love. In deep twilight, a maintenance skiff catches a beam and glints for one breath, then is gone. The sky keeps its modesty. No crowds gather. An amateur at a backyard pier writes the time in a notebook. A note in a quiet forum gathers 2 more observations and then rests. The work above is not a performance, it is a vow kept without applause. Constellations change without insult. Their figures lengthen, then lean, then become new stories. Children learn a different shape for the hunter, a softer arc for the great river of stars along the galactic plane. The changes are measured in the space between birthdays. Proper motion marks the nearest suns with barely a finger width in a human lifetime. Parallax still writes its tiny triangles into the positions of nearby lights as the Earth goes around. The grander motion sits behind all of this, a slow preference laid into the sun by mirrors and breathers, a slight correction to where the ship of worlds will be when new children are tall. Auroras answer the engines as weather answers a mountain. When the breathers smooth the wind upstream, the curtains dance with less raggedness. Their folds hold form for a few heartbeats more, then relax. On storm days, when the sun's voice grows loud, the necklace quiets what it can and steps aside where it must. The sky glows as it always did, green and rose and violet, and the rivers of charged particles find their old paths to the poles. In the ledger of many winters, the curtains spend more nights in grace and fewer in riot. No one notices on purpose. Bodies remember without words. Cosmic rays, those patient messengers from ancient violence, find the heliosphere a little more tidy in the favoured direction. The storm of high-energy specks that write brief scratches in the eyes of cameras drops by a small fraction that matters to instruments more than to minds. Telescopes breathe easier. Memories in silicon fail a touch less often. Seeds sprout with the same confidence as before. On average, under the smoothed wind, life feels an invisible courtesy. In observatories that do not hurry, astronomers point to stars that should arrive at one place in their slow walks and find them a hair's breadth aside. The measurements are precise and smooth, the proper motion of the sun bearing an extra whisper in the direction chosen by the engines. Papers are written with steady hands, the numbers pass into tables, navigation software is updated in a line that no pilot ever reads aloud. Breakfast is not interrupted. For the people who live here, night remains an instrument of rest. It carries the familiar sounds, a car passing farther away than it feels, a train like a long breath, a dog turning 3 times before it lies down. Above, the sky does not insist on its novelty. It invites only as much attention as you care to give, then returns the gift as sleep. The project that leans on the sun was designed with this in mind. The garden should not wake. If you climb a hill on a clear night and look toward the plane of the galaxy, you can feel the route without seeing it. The band is a little thinner where the ship has chosen it to be. The dust between stars dims the light by a shade less. The dark lanes are still there, but their edges are softer, because the wayfinding favoured the quieter side of a fold. Somewhere far ahead, a scout listens to the whisper of hydrogen and sends a note that confirms the choice. The note is not dramatic, it is folded into a chorus of others. The necklace leans by an angle that instruments can see and people cannot feel, and the sky is untroubled. There are nights set aside for listening. The maintenance loops slow, the depots dim their lamps, the breathers hold their scoops a little more still and listen to their own currents. On those nights, custodians gather in quiet yards to watch the solar face and let the calendar of storms teach them again. Children are allowed to stay awake. They trace the frost near the sun with cardboard circles. They learn the names of Lagrange points as if they were towns where cousins live. They go to sleep believing that the sky is faithful because many hands make it so. Rituals grow from patience. There is the day of the trim, when a tiny planned change in the Shkadov arc is read aloud like a poem, and a cheer rises for 1/10 of a millimetre per second. There is the week of the bearings, when a sector of the necklace rests while small rings are tested in cold and heat. There is a quiet festival for the retirement of a panel that passed its promise by 5 cycles, where a bell rings once and someone whispers the names of those who nursed it through storms. None of this appears in the night sky as fireworks. It appears as continuity, which is the only spectacle a home truly needs. From time to time, a comet chooses the inner light. The scouts saw it years ago and sent a calm letter. The inner system answered with a schedule that reads like kindness. A flyby here, a tiny burn there, a gravity tractor that hovers and holds for a season, and the curved path ends distant and harmless. On a winter morning, one long strand of dust becomes a new meteor shower. A few extra streaks write themselves across a village sky. Wishes are made. The fire goes out on the last one, and the cold comes back, and breakfast tastes good. The galaxy continues its own work. Arms drift, clusters age, shock fronts fade, then return, where new stars are born and die. The ship of worlds glides through this weather, with a preference that the engines keep alive. The preference is modest. It steers away from loudness and toward long quiet. It does not promise immortality, only time. Time is all that was ever needed for minds to learn, for bodies to heal, for stories to pass from one pillow to the next. When you look up on such a night, what you see is not a project. It is simply a sky that has learned to keep faith with sleep. The frost near the sun is faint. The constellations drift across a life and teach patience. The auroras breathe without hurry. The zodiac wears its scarf a little smoother. Somewhere, a wafer writes a hairline across the day star and is forgotten, as it should be, because the equipment of wonder is not the same as wonder. The ship moves. The garden stays asleep. The engines lean into their work as if work were a form of listening. The necklace adjusts its tone, the way a choir finds a pitch and holds it. The breathers persuade the wind to carry a message that only instruments can read. The message says that a family of worlds has chosen a lane through the galaxy, that it will reach quiet neighbourhoods and linger, that it carries with it a library of mornings and a memory of seas, and that its nights are not disturbed by the size of its intention. Let the sky close like a book for now. You have read enough of its gentle lines. The sun drifts with care, the planets keep their calm, the necklace listens and mends, and the breathers write a soft leaning into the wind. Constellations move by inches, tides breathe, and the path through the galaxy is drawn in patience, not in fire. Set your thoughts down like stones in a still pool. The ripples fade, the water remembers its glass, breathing slows, shoulders loosen, night gathers its quiet tools, and works around you without sound. If you wish, picture the frost of mirrors at the edge of dawn. Then let it blur, then let it go. Picture the aurora as a slow curtain, then let it fall. Picture our small ship among the stars, then let the image drift until even the stars become a soft grey behind your eyes. Sleep now, easily, safely, as the sun keeps its gentle course and the wide engine of light turns without haste. I will be here when morning finds you, and the sky will still be where you left it.